Today's video is going to be all about what you, the preppers, need to know about your safety in the upcoming election, in the upcoming not guilty police verdict, and more waves of the coronavirus, right after the channel intro. So folks, like I've said in numerous of my videos, I've been a police officer for just about 19 years now. So I've learned a thing or two about how the general public reacts to politically charged events, and also how the court systems generally work for people that get caught up in these controversial events. So today's video is to warn you for what I believe is going to be some major unrest that's going to be coming to this country in the very near future, and also hopefully help you to be able to protect yourself. And I also should point out that I believe that there are a lot of Marxists and insurgents that are actually behind a lot of these massive riots and looting and stuff like that, because what I think what they are trying to do is keep this country into enough turmoil that when election time comes, that people will actually vote liberal instead of conservative. But first, let's talk about police officers that have been arrested for use of force incidents across this country and how that is going to play into future riots across this country. And I'm going to be kind of speaking broadly on this subject because while I feel like the majority of these use of force incidents have been good use of force incidents and that these police officers should not have been arrested, obviously there has been some bad use of force incidents where the officers should have been charged. But I do believe that there have been good use of force incidents by the police officers, and they have still been charged and arrested and charged with murder by local politicians who are trying to placate the Marxists and the rioters in their area. So a Supreme Court ruling that we all should know about and be aware about is the Supreme Court ruling called Graham versus Connor. And what that Supreme Court ruling was that an officer's use of force must be reasonable, not perfect, but reasonable for what that officer perceived at that moment in time. So what's going to happen is that numerous of these officers that's been charged with using force, once their case goes to trial and Graham versus Connor is laid out and use of force experts testify on behalf of that officer of what he did, when he did it, then you're going to get a lot of not guilty verdicts by juries. And that's going to anger these people that's already wanting to riot and loot and stuff like that. So that's going to lead to more, probably even larger looting and rioting in the future. When these people rioted and looted, when these officers were arrested, how do you think they're going to do when they find out that the juries found them not guilty? And now, of course, the city leaders are going to come out and they're going to say, don't riot, don't loot. We arrested the officer. It's a jury, people of your peers, people that's in your community that gave them the not guilty, but the people are still going to riot and loot and cause havoc. And then when these massive riots and looting do start, then a lot of your police officers are going to be afraid to try to do anything. Either A, they might work in a city that tells them to stand down and let the rioting and looting go on, or B, they might be afraid to actually do anything, because then if they are forced to use deadly force to protect themselves, then they are afraid that they're going to be the next police officer that's going to be all over the news and getting wrongfully arrested and charged simply for trying to defend his own life. Folks, I'm just telling you this. The cringe left is just setting up a without rule of law situation to overtake their cities, for their cities to end up just imploding and burning down, and they don't even really know it. So if you live in one of these cities where there's a good chance that riots are going to happen, here is your warning to really seriously consider getting out now while you still can, or at minimum have yourself a solid bug out plan that you can immediately go to when that time comes. And now let's talk about the upcoming presidential elections. And I won't go into all the different reasons, again, for time's sake, but I really do believe that Trump is going to be elected to a second term. And the cringe left knows that there is a ton riding on this election up here, because if Trump gets reelected, then more than likely he's going to be able to put on another 1 or 2 more conservative judges onto the Supreme Court. And if that happens, that's going to swing the Supreme Court to have conservative rulings for decades to come. So if and when Trump gets reelected, I really believe that we're going to see massive protests that will probably turn into riots across this country. And then you can add insult to injury that when these protests and riots start turning really nasty and violent, that so many cops are going to be afraid to act, because so many liberal cities have arrested and charged police officers for legal and good uses of force. So now let's also talk about this COVID-19. So contrary to what the mainstream media wants to tell you on the nightly news, most of these politicians in these areas that decided to reopen their economies, most of these politicians knew that cases would rise once people started working and mingling again. But what was wanted was that not everybody would get infected all at once, is that it would spread the infections out over time. People understood that if we shuttered down, if we went in lockdown indefinitely, that we would have more deaths from side effects of trying to fight the virus than what the virus would actually kill itself. Now personally, I wear an N95 mask and I take precautions when I go into crowded places like grocery stores or places like that. But I am not one of those people that demand other people wear masks either. I think it's a freedom of choice there. But we just have to remember that people like us that want the economies open again and try to get life going back as normal as possible again, we just have to keep in mind that we could be wrong. We could end up having a second wave that hits even harder, much like the Spanish flu did 100 years ago. And then if that happens, then we could see more major lockdowns, more businesses closing because of these lockdowns, more people out of jobs, and then we would start seeing probably protests that might even turn into riots over all of this. Folks, what I'm trying to tell you is I really believe we're going to see more violence and more looting, more than what we're seeing now. And again, if you live in a very liberal city, I highly suggest that you start considering moving out now while your property still has property value, while you can still now get for the house what it's worth or what you paid for it. Because if you wait down the road to move out, your house might only be worth half its value, because the city that you live in has made all of these policies and done all these things that's created that city to become a war zone and to again lose property values that happen when cities become dangerous and businesses move out and new businesses don't come in and people are out of jobs, and then violence is up on the rise. So folks, why don't you do me a favor and comment below, what did I miss in this video? And do you also think that it's Marxists and anarchists that are behind these really violent riots? And do you also see that a lot of these large liberal cities are actually in a downward spiral? And if you are ever caught up in a protest where rioters are starting to attack your car, then click on the video that should be appearing on the screen just about now to learn what you can do to protect yourself. Anyways, folks, if you made it this far, hey, thank you very much for watching, and I pray that you have a good night.